The undercover policing inquiry. We've been listening to the questioning of Peter Francis, the former SDS undercover police officer who infiltrated anti-racist groups in the between 93 and 97. Unlike any of the other former undercover officers, he is the only undercover officer who has gone whistleblower. He went whistleblower back in 2010 and was part of the reason why the undercover policing inquiry exists. I'm joined by Heather Mendick, who's been listening to the questioning that we've had so far this morning. What have you made of what we've heard?
I think it's really interesting. I mean, his position is more complicated than anyone else's in the sense that lots of people have sympathy for him, but lots of people hate him, I think. And lots of people have both.
Yeah.
I think I have sympathy and I don't hate him, but there's things he says which are a problem in terms of how he represents activists. But the stuff he said today is all really compelling and really powerful because so thinking about from the break, it's been really concentrating on the racism in the police force and specifically how that related to the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. And we've had very clear evidence from him of racism from managers and all the way through the police force, and not just like racist terms, but actually really fundamentally racist ideas. And sometimes the racist terms like the M-word and stuff is, and using monkeys and things like that, is the thing which shocks you. But actually it's the other stuff, the underlying stuff that's more important. The fact that they did not believe that black people had the capacity to organize a campaign, and therefore these family justice campaigns could only be fronts for far left. They could never be authentic. And the fact that black families were by default a problem, and therefore it was only, the idea was that the Lawrences were an exception, but Dwayne Brooks was there's really horrible stuff about Dwayne Brooks about, it should have been him who died, not Stephen. And if it had happened, there'd be no campaign. And it's just really shocking stuff.
Really shocking. I mean, that particularly related to the comments of HN86, who was his manager, was also someone who he drove to work for 9 months. Yeah. So Peter Francis had a lot of one-to-one conversations with him. It was put to Peter Francis, was it because you were racist that he was willing to speak so openly in front of you? He said, well, I wouldn't consider myself as racist, but I certainly didn't dob him in or report what he'd said to other people, particularly Trevor Morris, the black undercover officer who he worked alongside and referred to as his best friend in the unit. The stuff about Dwayne Brooks, I think, was very revealing. I mean, not just because it was just so gross. I mean, just so horrible. I mean, just, kind of wishing that he was dead and wishing that he'd been the one who was killed instead of Stephen Lawrence. But this idea that it would have been much easier to stop the campaign if it had been Dwayne Brooks rather than Stephen Lawrence who'd been killed, because he was living... Peter Francis, I don't know if it's true, but what was told at the time was that he was living in a hostel, that he didn't come from a good home, that he was somehow connected to drug dealing, and but the fact that Stephen Lawrence had come from a good home, which was something which as soon as the Met Police was aware of, they communicated with the SDS. Was this was the great worry.
It's a problem,
the real problem. And he said how not good it was that they saw Imran Khan and Michael Mansfield coming out of the Lawrence family home, and this was considered not a good day for the Met. And then he then goes there, and then we had Nelson Mandela turning up a few weeks later, which
I mean, he's very direct that the problem was accountability. So there's always been that issue of, well, actually they were only trying to protect these campaigns from far left infiltration, which obviously is a racist attitude. But it's not just that, but Peter Francis is very clear that they saw a problem with police accountability, and that's what they were really threatened by. And so whatever they said and however racist they were, they didn't care about protecting these campaigns. They cared about protecting the police. And it's really interesting because Imran Khan is here in listening to this. So that's interesting. He's representing people. And I think this idea of a lawyer being, first of all, a lawyer taking sides is a problem for the police, clearly. But also there's a problem for the inquiry that David Barr, who's asking the questions this time, who's the guy who's really identifies with this inquiry more than anybody else on the inquiry team. Lead counsel, and the guy who's been with it the whole time and will be with it the whole time, will be the only person within that team who will be, is really offended, I think, as a lawyer when this stuff happens. And really, you could feel that tension in him. And it actually comes out that Peter Francis said, well, it would be hard to open a special branch file on a lawyer. You'd have to really convince them that it's subversive. But he cites belonging to the Haldane Society as evidence of subversion. The Haldane Society is a very mainstream organisation. It's really, if that's your level for subversion, then you're going to basically smear anybody who's a political lawyer on the left, because that's where people go. It's a society for socialist lawyers. It runs huge numbers of public meetings, campaigning. It's a really good organisation. But it's insane that was enough to get you a special branch file.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was asked to describe how Imran Khan was referred to by officers. He was a pain in the arse for the Metropolitan Police. And about Michael Mansfield, the devil incarnate. Yeah. Which, I mean, very flowery language.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I asked, was there anything racist about Imran Khan? And he's like, nah. Because they were just really worried about accountability again. Their racism kind of went out the window then when they saw, when they were just like, no, this is really about us worrying about anybody criticizing anything we're doing, anything. It's all damaged reputation. Reputation management.
We heard a lot about Bob Potter, who was the DCI of the SDS during time of the Lawrence's family campaign, particularly in the aftermath of Welling. And I thought it was very revealing about his attitude. And he gave like a debrief meeting in the Thursday after the Welling demonstration to the SDS, and that he really felt that this was Welling was somehow this was like some culmination of something to do with the Lawrence campaign, even though the Lawrences weren't actually on that march. A different march that same day, but they saw him as one and the same thing, and that we'd won. He talked about how happy he was about seeing the running battles that had taken place. He said that everybody was really hyper, that everybody was on a high, that all the SDS officers were on a high in the aftermath. They all felt that it was been really successful, the Welling demonstration, but that but Potter particularly was even more hyper than usual. He was a particularly hyper character in general, and being grossly racist, but particularly grossly racist on the one-to-one, which weren't actually one-to-one. It was Potter speaking to Peter Francis whilst HN86 and HN67 were present, and some of the language used in that was extreme racism, really extreme racism about targeting the family justice campaigns who were being led like with rings through their noses. I mean, talking about monkeys, all this racist language. He was asked to describe the racist language used. I'm not going to repeat it here. I felt really awkward actually putting it on my Twitter. You can repeating what he was saying, but it kind of, you can report from these things. You kind of have to do it. He was particularly uncomfortable of repeating some of it, to be fair.
Peter didn't want to. He said at one stage, I'd just rather you read it. I mean, it does feel like he's genuinely disturbed by racism, and that's really what triggered him to whistleblow. That he was living with these things for a very long time and not saying anything, and feeling like he was being, I think, some ways disloyal to Trevor Morris, actually, in sort of a weird way. So I think it's probably more that than the Stephen Lawrence campaign. But I think he did. It is interesting that the Stephen Lawrence campaign is probably the reason why we've got this inquiry in lots of ways.
In many ways. I mean, I think there are other strands. I think that all the work that the women did in tracking down the men who deceived them, I think is a huge part of it as well. But I mean, just going back to that thing about the reaction of the SDS to the aftermath of the Welling demonstration, because we've heard so much about Welling. And and it was such an abuse of power, that it was such a horrific day. Where the police really kind of like lost their heads a bit and just went where it seemed to be out for blood. But the reaction from that, and not just like that night or something that they were all on a high, but this is like a week later.
Well, clearly, it's very clear that the police see their enemies not as criminals, but as the left, really, as political campaigners. And it's, I suppose, things like that bring it out very starkly, both in terms of the violence, but in terms of what you're describing. That I mean, this is, I suppose, why Peter Francis is such an important witness, because he has such insider knowledge of these really things that you never hear from the police. The police are so good at hiding it, and he's very measured. So when he says things like that, you feel like they're true, because he got asked by a whole list of people, was this guy racist? Was this guy racist? And he says a lot of times no. Most of the time he says no, I didn't hear anything racist from him. So when he says I did from this person, you kind of, it feels more trustworthy, because he's not just gunning for everyone. He's trying to give a fair representation, and it's just, the police are horrible. And he says actually that it's not just special branch. It's all across. I mean, if you're looking for more evidence, the systematicity of it, the structuralness of it, to try and convince admitting of institutional racism. You getting it from this testimony very clearly.
Yeah, very, very clearly indeed. Yeah. I mean, there has been a number of breaches in the session this morning. I can't say about what they are, obviously, because they're subject to report restriction order. I normally say, oh, but they're nothing particularly interesting. That's actually not the case this time. They are incredibly interesting, but I literally can't talk about them. But I mean, it does reveal so much of how much of this inquiry takes place outside of these open hearings, and not just in those closed hearings, which we know about, but we don't get to hear what's said, but also the secret hearings that take place where we have no idea how many there are. We have no idea what's said in them. We have no idea who the witnesses are. And really it just, underlines once again that it's only a glimpse that we see. All the report, I mean, I always say, I go to every hearing of the undercover police inquiry, I only get a glimpse because I'm only allowed to get a glimpse of what goes on.
Yeah, and it also emphasizes the anxiety around this testimony. So usually what happens with these restriction order breaches now is they're dealt with very quickly. So yeah, you lose the feed at home if you're watching on YouTube for 20 minutes, but in the actual inquiry itself, you don't lose anything. It's just like, oh dear, like they go out, write a bit of paper, John Mitting as chair reads a bit of paper, and then everything's going on as normal. This time we got the kind of old-fashioned one where you have to stay in the room. No one's allowed to leave until there's been some kind of ruling. John Mitting has to actually leave the room. Everything has to stop. And it feels like everyone is hypersensitive to what may or may not be said because of the threat to state power that Peter Francis, more even than any of the witnesses on our side of the activist represents. It's very dangerous for them to have someone who was on their side, who's now not on their side. Yeah,
you really do see the fear around a whistleblower. I mean, just to give you an idea, like you say, when most of the time now, we kind of, the stenographers just carry on and the transcript is edited later. We saw all the inquiry lawyers gathering around the stenographers, like purging that particular section from the transcript in real time before we could carry on, before anything else could happen, which is not what we used to really during the hearings now.
I think is a reason why you should come in for this if you can, because you don't get that sense of anxiety. So clearly communicated. You can't in YouTube. It's sort of, it all gets filtered out, and that the sort of feeling in the room. It's fascinating. Yeah.
I mean, I should say, so like normally there is rows of desks in the public gallery. The inquiry decided to remove all the desks so it could get extra rows of chairs in. Apparently, someone said, I don't know how true this is, that there were 70 people who had booked to appear at to use the public gallery today. There's a lot less than that.
Yeah, there's fewer than there was last week for Doreen Lawrence and for the real family and stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I would say maybe 15, maybe 20 people at most.
Yeah. Like that,
so there's plenty of space. If you are able to come down and you are interested, then I really recommend coming down. No trouble getting in. Bring some ID. There's lots and lots of seats. You won't get a desk, I'm afraid. They're in short supply. I've managed to snag a desk.
I tweeted at them to put the desks back because they always have to read the tweets to check there's nothing dodgy in. So it's the best way of communicating with the staff. It's just use a hashtag.
Yeah.
So see what happens over lunch.
I mean, maybe we'll get some desks back. I mean, hopefully they'll be back tomorrow at the very least, because it is it must be quite frustrating not having that.
It's annoying not having charging point and not being able to use your laptop if you want to, but it's not the worst thing in the world, right? But it's annoying, Anyway,
so I mean, we are only like very, very short way in. We're in 1/8 of the way into Peter Francis's questioning. There's a lot to go. I mean, we haven't got anything really about his personal deployment. I mean, one thing actually quite interesting. He submitted into evidence a couple of things. One of which was Margaret Thatcher's appearance at the SDS the Special Branch Centenary Ball of 1983, which is before he became a Special Branch officer. It's a document he'd got from the Royal Archives in Kew. And within it, she mentions in her little very brief speech, saying how happy she is to be with Special Branch that day, about the fact that it was the anti-Vietnam War campaign that led to the infiltration of left-wing groups. And then just written in handwriting, it just says the SDS next to it. We don't have confirmation whether it was Margaret Thatcher's writing herself or not, but it suggests that there was a knowledge right up to the Prime Minister about the SDS. And in fact, we have heard about how HN86 would talk about the fact that he had a direct line to the Home Secretary, that the Prime Minister was aware of what they were doing, that when he talked about Lawrence, he would say, it's on their desk, it's on the Prime Minister's desk, it's on the Home Secretary's desk, and a real sort of sense that the information is flowing.
Handwriting was censored.
Yes, handwriting
I think that's very telling. Like normally we see handwritten comments. This one, it was like they replaced it with the words SDS handwritten. So obviously it's someone very famous's handwriting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it does suggest that.
Yeah.
I mean, we've heard lots about how the Prime Thatcher particularly directed the SDS to infiltrate the Greenham Common women.
Yeah.
We actually, one little tidbit we heard was that when we was asked about the sexism and the racism that was said within the SDS unit, Peter Francis said, "Oh, there was more often than not there was one female undercover officer, never more than one, but like often there was one, and sometimes the banter would decrease when they were around because they were often very forthright characters, the women SDS officers, which I thought was quite interesting."
Oh yeah, before I'm going to go for lunch now, but before I do, I would say, you reminded me, they talked about this trip to Amsterdam.
Yes, the trip to Amsterdam.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, like they all just like went off on some. I mean, so we talk about it. You do get to occasionally, if you work in the private sector, go on these nice little jaunts for the weekend. You never get them in the public sector. I've worked in the public sector all my life. No one takes you away for the weekend on the kind of team building activity. But in the SDS, they did. They went team building to Amsterdam
and lots of other places as well.
But clearly, if you go to Amsterdam, there's like a whole laddish culture thing. There were loads of jokes about the red light district. Everyone went there. He wouldn't say for sure that anyone had sex with anybody there, but it was kind of, I mean, so the sexism is gross. It's really gross as well. We haven't talked about that, but
I mean, the sexism was particularly gross. I mean, a lot of that was kind of said like early doors. I chatted to Dave about it in the last break, but no, I mean, I think it's worth going over again. I mean, like definitely the idea that like sex whilst you were deployed undercover was more than just tolerated. It was kind of accepted. It was seen as part of it. We heard a lot about use of condoms.
Yes, that was an interesting thing as well. Was it wasn't just that sex was like expected. It was because of the way that activists were. There was this idea that women activists were just like gonna go after guys, and it was a very derogatory, sexist kind of thing. So again, it's not just the actual attitudes, it's the underlying ideas that there are about Black people and women that kind of come through these things and that define the language and the attitudes and the horrible abuses that happened shape those. Yeah,
very much. Anything else you'd like to add?
No.
Okay, we're back again this afternoon. There's a lot more to be heard from Peter Francis. I expect there'll be an afternoon break and an end of day break. Just looking at some of the comments, again, nothing of any sense. If people do leave comments, we can react to them and bring them up on screen, but we're very short of any sensible ones, so I'm not going to react to them. All right, thanks for joining. See you all again later. Cheers. Bye for now.
Thank you.